Good morning everyone, I hope you're well. I just wanted to record a little message this morning just to encourage you. I'm really coming out of our prayer time yesterday, and just a little thing I felt God speaking to me about in the night. And so I woke up about 4 a.m. last night, and I don't know if you've had the same experience, but sometimes it feels like God is waking you up, and because he's got something to say or something that you need to talk about. And so there I was, awake at 4 a.m. and the thing on my mind was the church, was God's people, was you. And I suppose that's what shepherds do, pastors do, they sort of worry about their sheep. And I was thinking about another 3 weeks of lockdown and what that meant for everybody, how people were going to navigate through that. So I just prayed a very simple prayer, and I said, Lord, is there anything that you want to say to us as your people in this time? And this is what happened. This is what I felt God say to me. And I suppose sort of like a prophetic moment perhaps, that I just want to share with you. So the first thing I saw God's people, and they were standing in the front of this, in the face of this big black cloud. And I felt that it was the virus, but I also felt like there were lots of other things that had been thrown into this black cloud by the enemy to make it more terrifying and more confusing. But as God's people stood and faced it, it just retreated. And I just felt that this cloud, it couldn't withstand the resilience of God's people. That we were getting our strength from a surprising place. We were getting our strength from the covenantal promises of God. And I suppose it's in that realization that we are God's covenant people that we do find strength, we do find courage, and we do find fortitude, because God sent his son Christ to die on a cross to cut this new covenant with us. And it's a covenant of grace, it's a covenant of love, it's a covenant of peace. I see it as God's peace treaty with humanity. And it's as we stand on that covenant and stand in that covenant and stand on God's promises that we understand that we get to enjoy his protection and we get to enjoy his provision, because we're set apart, we're holy in his sight through the work of Christ, we're God's people. And I feel this is the time for us to really stand up and be and embrace that identity as God's people. We are his people. And as I was lying there, and these thoughts were sort of running through my mind, it began to rain. I could just hear a little sort of patter outside on the window. And it was very gentle at first, but then it began to get heavier and heavier. You may have heard it, and until there were like thunderclaps and it was torrential. And as I was listening to it, I said to the Lord, what are you saying in this moment? Is there something you're trying to tell me through the storm and through this moment? And I felt the Lord remind me of the story of Elijah, and how when he prayed for rain, you probably know the story, he prayed for rain, and it says that he saw this tiny cloud. They'd had drought for 3 years, and he saw this tiny cloud appear, and that was the beginning of this mighty storm that would end the drought. And I felt the Lord just speaking to me and telling me that this was, well, we had entered this sort of time of transition, that this storm was like a sign of change. And I felt it was a bit like, I felt the image he gave me was like a nut that was being loosened. I don't know if you've ever had that situation with a nut and you're trying to loosen it with a spanner, and eventually it sort of gives way. And I felt it was a bit of a moment like that. And the other image I felt the Lord give me was of like a baby being born, and how when a baby is born it has to enter this time of transition, a transition period. And the transition period is where the baby's head goes down into the birth canal, and it's the most dangerous time for the baby and the most dangerous time for the mother, and it's when the mother needs the most encouragement and the mother needs the most reassurance in this time of transition. And I sort of feel like that's the period we're in. We've sort of entered this period of transition, period of change. And we need to be encouraging one another. We need to be supporting one another. And the other little image, my mind was just sort of filling with images. The other image I felt God gave me was of a bell jar, like we used to do at school, like a bell jar experiment. where you, a bit like the birth canal. I mean, the birth canal is a place of restriction and a place of confinement, but it's also a place that the baby has to go through on its journey to be born. And I felt like with this bell jar that it was a place of restriction and a place that's been set up for an experiment, and the conditions are just right for the correct outcome. And like, God is using this circumstance we're in to do something in his people. And it's a place of confinement, and it's a place of restriction, and even a place of pain at times. But the Lord is at work to bring something to life, to bring something to birth, to produce the reaction that he wants, to use the scientific analogy. So I really think I want to encourage you as we sort of enter these next 3 weeks. Stand firm on God's covenantal promises. Know that you are his people. Know that he loves you and he is your provider. He is your protector. And he's got this covered. You know, we need to keep, I feel for the church, it's a time for us to keep our spiritual nerve and to accept the way that God is working in our lives at this time is gonna result in glory and praise. And it's going to result in good for God's people. And so I woke up, I did manage to get back to sleep, and I woke up in the morning and I started to tell Mandy about my dream and about the storm. And Mandy's instant reaction was, that's amazing. Esme's been writing a story about a storm. And Esme's my 15-year-old daughter, in case you didn't know. And here, with Esme's permission, is her story. And I'm just going to read it to you. And it's called Crowns. The sky wailed, its mouth open, its eyes white with terror. Its countenance was enveloped in a dark grey and seemed to shake with persistent fear. Once bright with a festival of dawn, the expanse of azure now enclosed itself in its own death-coloured shroud as the storm commenced. The rain descended, its beating pulse then lulled, and remaining portions of light were gradually consumed. Pelting violently through the trees, the heavy drops cracked and split the black brambles. Turbulent, the storm raged on, and thickening rain slanted sharply through the glistening boughs of thickets and foliage. Shaking, the leaves on the trees struggled, tormented and quivering. Approaching them was a future controlled by the omnipotent force of the suffocating blanket of rain. The stately trees, once peaceful watchmen, were suddenly overthrown and heaved in hoarse and shallow breaths. Saplings, like children hiding behind their parents, lowered their tender heads towards the ground, their scurfy, russet bark bent in agony in the force of the turbulent winds. The storm hurt the animals too. The chattering communication from bird to bird was suddenly quenched, muted by the ungraceful swirling gale. Sodden rabbits cowered helplessly in their burrows, and foxes, their fiery tails buffeted by the wind, attempted to find shelter behind barricades of brambles. A malevolent enemy approached. It did not seem to affect the deer, though. Their elongated, slender antlers protruded like the smoothed bark of the moaning trees nearby. Fur-covered, their faces were almost like the stippled colours of the storm itself, freckled with dark brown spots on their leathering noses. Their eyes were the colour of the raging winds, churning in murky patches of feathery darkness, and yet poised and calm. Their posture was almost victorious. Their feet planted firmly on the ground resembled the surety of certain conquest, as though even the shuddering earth beneath them was a weak opponent, unable to threaten their stability. But then the rain stopped. Strangely, it was now the darkness that shrunk in the face of the light, and it plummeted down to the trees to hide its dishevelled body from the incandescent rays which poured abundantly through the forest canopy. Mayhem was eaten away, and in a moment there was stillness, and in that little corner of a tempestuous world. A day, the colour of soft apricots now illuminated the serene trees with a pleasing, warm hue. Out of the small clearing, the deer appeared, their antlers like crowns adorning their slim heads with peace under the light autumn sky. So God bless you, have a great day, and see you soon.